Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and very good morning here from Washington, D.C. Welcome to this global webinar series on strengthened budget credibility through external audit. We are delighted to be together today with all of you for this session on strengthening performance of public financial management through external audits. As many of you know, this series is organized by the United Nations Economic and Social Affairs UNDSA's Division on Public Institutions and Digital Government and the International Budget Partnership in collaboration with authors and contributors of a wonderful handbook. I recommend all of you who may not have seen in the past to take a look. That's on strengthening budget credibility through external audit and Auditor's Handbook. Friends, my name is Srinivas Gurajada. I'm head of PIFA Secretariat. For those of you who do not know PIFA, PIFA is Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability. It's a partnership of several development partners, and we maintain what is known as the gold standard for PFM framework called the PIFA framework, which many of you in countries would have seen PIFA assessment reports. And it's my great pleasure to be moderator for this virtual event today. I invite all the participants to actively engage in discussions by using the chat box to introduce yourself. I see many friends. I right now see a colleague from Kenya typing in and others. So please do come in and introduce yourself in the chat, and also ask your questions and experiences through the chat function. This is the third session of this webinar series. The primary intention is to enable peer learning on various ways in which Supreme Audit Institutions may assess and address budget credibility issue. This series of webinars follows the handbook, which I mentioned earlier. So it draws on various SAI experiences in regions, and this handbook itself explores different approaches to auditing budget credibility and provides a practical overview of existing and potential audit work that can contribute to higher budget credibility. Let me mention also from PIFA perspective. So when we say a PIFA framework has 31 indicators and 64 dimensions, but all in a diagrammatically, when we take all the pillars of PIFA, everything eventually boils down to how credible budgets are. So budget credibility is, in a sense, a proxy for efficient public financial management systems overall, and that's what this handbook is targeting. Today, we also discuss in this sound PFM systems, which are essential, how they are essential for delivery of services, delivery of goods and services to citizens, which is the focus of good PFM systems. By improving effectiveness of PFM systems, we can generate widespread and lasting benefits that may in turn help reinforce wider societal shifts for more inclusive and effective institutions. Let me also mention, so the United Nations monitors SDGs on various data sources. One of the SDGs 16.6.1 on developing effective institutions is essentially based on budget credibility. And we in PIFA Secretariat, we provide the data for measuring over time the effectiveness of institutions through budget credibility as such. SAIs, Supreme Audit Institutions, have a very critical role and a key mandate to scrutinize government transactions and get us through the accountability cycle for public funds. External audits on performance of PFM systems, when they audit the PFM systems, when Supreme Audit Institutions audit PFM systems, they can shed light whether the institutional arrangements are in place to contribute to budget credibility. Now, we have a very, very eminent panel of experts, speakers to speak today to all of us in this conversation. They'll talk about the main entry points for SAIs, on how to get through audit processes, look at the PFM processes and activities. We'll consider international standards, What are all the diagnostic tools available? Let me digress also and mention. So the diagnostic tools, for some of you who may be wondering, how many PFM tools are there in the world today? So we recently conducted a stock taking in the PIFA Secretariat, and the number is 64 as of the cutoff date and is going up today, which means the world has a wide range of PFM diagnostic tools right now available. Ministries of Finance and auditors in general have to take inspiration and work on strengthening PFM systems as such. And we'll discuss how this all evolves through this channel, through this webinar, and the methodologies how auditors can use and the challenges auditors face in going through, and conclude also into how a performance audit of a PFM system can be conducted. So with that, let's now begin and deep dive into the sessions, the talks themselves. Let's start with our very eminent first speaker, Nancy Gatungu, Auditor General of Kenya. It's a great honor that the Auditor General is Honorable Auditor General is the first speaker for this. And Ms. Gatungu, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Srinivas. I want to start by saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants in this webinar. I also want to thank the International Budget Partnership and the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs for organizing this webinar series on strengthening budget credibility. Indeed, these webinars are very important as the issues we are dealing with currently, be it climate change mitigation or adaptation, preparedness for disasters, response to pandemics or economic shocks in our respective economies, all these require strong and responsive public finance management systems. And as you have rightly pointed out, PFM systems is very, very important to our economies and our countries. There is no doubt that there is a positive correlation between the strength of a PFM system and institutions and sustainable development and effective service delivery to the people. Countries that have strong PFM systems are able to provide quality and timely services to their citizens. However, where we have weak PFM systems and weak institutions, there is a high risk of irregular expenditures, loss of revenue, which results to inefficiencies, wastefulness, corruption, and fraud with regard to public resources. And this, of course, impacts very negatively on economic development and service delivery to the people. A sound PFM system, therefore, is a critical enabler for efficient mobilization of resources and transparency in allocation of public funds. It also enables effective and equitable public spending, accountability, and reporting for the funds and oversight. And a sound PFM system is a necessary condition for achieving the SDGs for our national development plans, as well as responding to emerging issues, including responding appropriately to shocks brought about by unforeseen circumstances, including disasters. To share the experiences of the SAI of Kenya, let me attempt to share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay.
Fantastic. Yes, now this is perfect.
Yes. To share, if I could start with the issue of the annual audits that we do as the Supreme Audit Institution of Kenya. We carry out both annual audits that are constitutional. They are also well defined in the Public Finance Management Act and the Public Audit Act of Kenya of 2015. We also carry out special audits, also determined by the Constitution and the law. And we have been carrying out budget absorption analysis through these audits as part of our annual audits, including public debt. And one of the areas that we have raised concerns about is budget absorption. An important goal of a PFM system is to support reliable and efficient resource flows and transactions, leading to results and service delivery. So currently, we are now reporting not only on how ministries and departments absorb their funds, we are also reporting on how they receive that funding, the timing of receipts, and what is achieved with what is received. So we are going beyond analysis of budget expenditure versus actual expenditure at the entity level to a third level of analyzing actual receipts, which affects operations. We have also been carrying out what we refer to as budget credibility audit currently. I'm in the process of finalizing a special audit on budget credibility analysis that covers about 3 financial years from 2020-2021 to 2022-2023. And this audit is assessing the compliance of budget execution with relevant legislations in our country. We have employed data analytics to undertake the audit, and there are some high-level interesting preliminary findings which we are still analyzing. And these include a shrinking budget trend for development expenditure compared to recurrent expenditure, which means recurrent expenditure is rising while development expenditure is reducing. And then you'd ask a question. If the recurrent expenditure is spent on, for example, payment of remuneration and salaries, what are you paying people to do if there is no commensurate development taking place? We have also realized as part of the preliminary findings, which we are still analyzing, that revenues are growing at a much slower pace than expenditures, which is leading to increased borrowings and unsettled obligations, and in particular, significant expenditure arrears. We carried out a special audit recently on the use of supplementary budgeting as guided by the Kenyan Constitution, which was referred to as a special audit on Article 223, because that is the article that authorizes such spending. And the audit covered 9 years between 2014-2015 and 2022-2023. And the findings were quite interesting, where we had to recommend improvements to the budget process, which includes amending the legal framework to provide guidance on supplementary budgeting and to streamline the use of contingency funds for unforeseen or emergency situations instead of supplementary budgeting and planned for circumstances, because we do have contingency funding within our constitution and within our PFM. So we share our audit results with the Parliament through the various committees, like the Public Accounts Committee, the Budget and Appropriations Committee, the Public Debt and Privatization Committees, and we also share with the National Treasury and Planning and publish our reports required by the laws of Kenya. We initiated what we refer to as the Citizen Accountability Audit, and it is sometimes referred to as the Social Accountability Audits. And we did this in 2019. And these audits are based on constitutional requirements that citizens in Kenya must participate in public finance affairs. It is a means of incorporating citizens' voices in our audits. And when carrying out these audits, we work very closely with civil society organizations and the citizens at the grassroots level. A key audit which I have issued is a report on public participation in the budget-making process at the sub-national level, where unfortunately we noted that the constitutional requirement to involve citizens is not adhered to, and recommendations on how to improve public participation framework as part of our PFM systems were issued. Currently, we are also undertaking other audits involving the citizens, including for the Global Fund and the World Bank, and the reports are at the review stage, and I shall be issuing these reports in good time. I want to speak about one of the tools. Srivanas, you did indicate that there are many tools. I think you said there are about 64. And the PFM RF, or the Public Finance Management Reporting Framework tool, is one of those tools. My office applies the PFM RF tool. It is a diagnostic framework developed in 2017 by the African Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, English speaking, together with the support from GIZ. It is used by Supreme Audit Institutions or auditors generals and presidents of courts of audits to assess the performance of the PFM system. The tool enables the auditors generals and the presidents of courts of audits to take an active role and amplify their voices in PFM assessments. It looks at the PFM systems holistically, including the processes, the institutions, and it allows auditors to assess the performance of the processes along the entire budget cycle, identify key PFM risk areas, and the root causes of any identified underperformance. Very, very critical, the root causes, because when you identify root causes, then you're able to give recommendations that speak to the real problem, and not just face value or symptomatic recommendations. So we started this journey in 2018 through a desktop review and pilot assessments, and carried out a full assessment for the financial year 2019-2020 in November 2020. And the results were quite interesting. We noted particularly that macroeconomic and fiscal focusing is one of the weak areas in the PFM process. And I believe most Supreme Audit institutions will tell you this is where the budgeting problems begin, because we focused very positively. Then we don't realize, then we have the deficits, we have to go into supplementary budgeting, or we end up not funding all the programs and projects that were planned for to deliver services to the people. We also noted that mainstreaming of the sustainable development goals in the various ministries, departments, and agencies were varied from entity to entity. And that requires that we mainstream uniformly to ensure that we achieve the SDGs. Currently, we are undertaking a second full assessment, and it will be quite interesting to see the results of the PFM reforms that have been ongoing in Kenya. Timely and effective implementation of audit recommendations is critical for strengthening the PFM system. We can audit and report at Supreme Audit Institutions, but if implementation or improvements do not take place, there is no significant impact of audit and oversight. In fact, it's just money wasted. If you have a Supreme Audit Institutions that is carrying out its work, but the results are not being listened to, the results are not being applied, the recommendations are not being implemented, it is a waste of time and resources. So Kenya developed a framework for tracking and follow-up and reporting of audit recommendations in 2022, which brings relevant stakeholders together to ensure timely resolution of audit findings through an effective tracking system and dissemination of audit follow-up data. The framework identifies the roles and responsibilities of each stakeholder, and we are working very, very closely with the National Treasury, the Head of Public Service, and Parliament to implement this framework. Indeed, the executive in Kenya has made it mandatory to follow up recommendations from my office and Parliament, which is popularly now referred to as the zero-fault audit regime. And this is a commitment to implement audit recommendations, which I believe will lead to improvements in public finance management. I thank you for the opportunity to share SAI Kenya's experiences.
Thank you very much, Auditor General Gatungu. It's such a phenomenal, quick overview of all the steps, experiences from Kenya. And what actually touched me a lot is the way you position to say that the weak PFM systems are going to contribute to greater risks of corruption. Probably PF and wastage. PFM is probably one of the best ways to mitigate risks of wastage, inefficiency, fraud, and corruption in government. And that echoes very well. And thanks for taking us through the usage of tool in the country. And also, like, I love the way you said, zero-fault audit regime. That's wonderful, and that's what I believe many countries can take inspiration from and move forward. Thank you very much, and please stay connected, and we'll come back in the question and answers session further. So let me now turn to our panel. The first speaker on the panel is Ramadan Nagruha Putra, Senior Auditor from Indonesia. So from Kenya, we are going now to Indonesia. Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia to make initial comments as panelists on this topic to talk about PFM through external audit. How do you strengthen PFM? Go ahead, Ramadan.
Okay, thank you, Srinivas. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from Indonesia. Firstly, I would like to thanks IBP and Wendisa for organizing this webinar. and also for inviting us to be a speaker in this occasion about strengthening the budget credibility by the external auditors. So let me start by saying that Supreme Audit Institutions have a crucial function within the public financial management system, and their pivotal roles include auditing and reporting on government revenue mobilization, public fund allocation, expenditure, and financial accounting. These processes are integral to effective PFM, and to ensure thorough oversight of how public resources are managed, it is imperative that SAIs operate independently, effectively, and with credibility while executing their mandates. And SAIs should have unrestricted access to all essential information required for the proper fulfillment of the auditor responsibilities. Next, let me share my presentation. Okay, external auditors have various methods for evaluating budget credibility. One of which involves a comprehensive examination of the overall performance of the PFM system. For instance, Supreme Audit Institutions can assess the reliability and the transparency of budgets, the management of assets and liabilities, and also the basis for budget formulation, whether it relies on a true assessment or of fiscal trends or on ad hoc information. The predictability in budget execution, the causes, the reason behind any instance of underspending or overspending, and the effectiveness of accounting and reporting in informing and supporting other key components of the PFM system, among other factors. And discussing about assessing performance against the objective of the PFM system, ideally, evaluating the performance of the PFM system involves measuring its effectiveness against specific objectives. For instance, assessing aggregate fiscal discipline can be done through tools like the FIFA assessment, quantifying the alignment of revenue collection and spending with the appropriate budget. Transparency and accountability, on the other hand, can be measured using the open budget survey that's providing insight into transparency, oversight, and public investment in fiscal affairs. However, a comprehensive evaluation of strategic allocation and operational efficiency requires in-depth studies. In practical terms, PFM system assessment typically concentrate on scrutinizing the institutions, tools, and procedures that are most likely to ensure the achievement of the PFM system. External audits in this context may appraise the achievement of this objective, such as budget credibility, and scrutinize how the existing institutional arrangements contribute to their success. Therefore, auditors can directly examine how PFM institutional arrangements work to ensure budget credibility and the causes of underperformance. So in this regard, auditor specifically designed to audit to assess whether the PFM institutional arrangements support the budget credibility. As we know that PFM systems are expected to support the achievement of three main objectives: aggregate fiscal discipline, allocative efficiency, and operational efficiency. And for example, to achieve allocative efficiency, auditors work to ensure that the spending limits are established and followed. And also reallocation of the budgets must be based either on evaluative findings of programs or on plans to evaluate policy initiatives. Alternatively, auditor can focus on other important elements of PFM system, such as transparency or fiscal discipline, and relate the audit findings with risk or budget credibility. That is, that auditor may audit the financial statement as part of transparency approach, and then the audit findings will be connected with the relevant budget credibility risks. And regarding the methodology, the Supreme Audit Institution has the option to employ a performance audit to evaluate the effectiveness of the PFM system. And we specifically, SAIOP Indonesia, have done various performance audit regarding the PFM system. And why we choose the PFM system? Because we believe that performance audit can go beyond the regulation, the existing regulation. So you buy performance audits, the SAI can recommend the government to make something, to issue regulation about something that has not been regulated yet. So it is not be bound by the existing regulation, even though the government may have may have followed the regulation, but if there is still a room for improvement, then the auditors can encourage the government, can recommend to the government to make something that has not been regulated yet. In addition to audit tools, SAI may also rely on existing PPM reporting frameworks to evaluate the performance of the PPM system, such as the SDG goal, PIPA, or fiscal transparency code. Next, I would like to talk about how to select the topic for the auditing the performance system based on our experience in Indonesia. So the first one is about selecting the area and topic to be audited. And when conducting an audit of the PPM system, it is prudent to have a specific strategy for selecting the key areas to be audited, identifying the audit topic, and developing the audit criteria. Audit subjects related to budget credibility can be sourced from two primary origins. Firstly, from a concern identified through a review of the audit environment, encompassing elements like previous audits, government perspective, budget documents, IGT's annual reports, external evaluation, media coverage, prior audit fieldwork, performance indicator analysis, discussion, and other source of information. Another example, if the country's public financial management has been assessed, has undergone assessment using the indicators like those from the FIFA framework or another international assessment framework, then the SAI can utilize the outcomes to pinpoint areas in need of improvement. So they can use the FIFA as a source information to then further scrutinize the aspect of the PPM system. So they can use the FIFA work to decide what audit topics should be done to the government. Additionally, that input from citizens might also be taken into account when determining subjects. In Indonesia, we refer to purpose audit to identify relevant topics. For instance, a prior performance audit on budget preparation revealed a lack of synchronization between two separate ministries responsible for the process. So this finding from us to select the synchronization of national development planning and budgeting as a pertinent audit topic. Next, about designing the audit involves formulating clear and relevant audit objectives, key question, and identifying audit criteria that will be supported by the documentation of the audit plans and strategy. Defining audit objective is crucial stakes in the PPM system. In the context of budget credibility, auditors are encouraged to create explicit audit objectives and inquiries that center around budget credibility as a key objective within the PPM system. If audits not exclusively focus on budget credibility, the audit objectives should be adaptable enough to enable auditors to align potential finding with budget credibility in the audit's conclusion and recommendation. And when designing the audit question and criteria, the audit question serves as a description of previously established audit objectives. We at Indonesia advise our auditors to organize audit question into at least 3 hierarchical levels, with sub-question at the lowest tier addressed through specific audit procedures. And this sub-question also refer to specific criteria forming the foundation for collecting audit evidence. Criteria in performance audit are often derived from audit question and can be either qualitative or quantitative. The criteria will focus on what should be based on laws, regulation, or standards, what is expected according to principles, scientific knowledge, or best practice, or what could be given better condition. Following the development of the audit question and criteria, then auditors identify the necessary audit evidence and procedures. SAIs can employ methods such as focus group discussion and benchmarking when designing audit criteria and questions. And next, conducting the audit. Throughout the audit process, auditors may employ various techniques such as focus group discussion and benchmarking to support their findings. To enhance the capabilities, auditors can also engage experts with specialized skills, such as in statistical computation and analysis. And furthermore, in this area of data-driven era, the integration of big data analysis is very important and requires adequate hardware support. Big data analysis become important when assessing government-wide data. It allows auditor to analyze data comprehensively, examining government budget behavior and identifying trends in each government account over time, both at the whole of government level and within ministries or agencies. Big data analytics has proven effective in scrutinizing, planning, and budgeting system database, ensuring synchronization and enabling auditors to identify anomalies in the budget cycle, such as discrepancy between budget performance indicators in budget documents and those in planning documents. Next, develop audit findings, conclusion, recommendation, reporting, and follow-up. So we'd like to share about our recent audit regarding the performance of the PFM system. In 2015, we conduct audit on the performance of audit on state budget preparation, and some notable impacts that our government issue regulation to synchronize the planning and budgeting process. And also our government have considered tax policies while budgeting tax revenue, since it will have an impact on the achievement of the tax target. In 2018, we conduct performance audit on quality expenditure management based on performance-based budgeting framework. And some notable impacts are the government have developed the quality expenditure definition and indicators. Why we think that definition and indicators is important? Because it will be used as a tools in evaluation, in budget evaluation. And for a transparency and accountable purpose, when the government said that their spending quality has improved, they have to prove it. The definition and indicators will be the tool to prove that the quality expenditure has increased. And also the indicators will be used when evaluating the achievement, the government expenditure. And also other notable impact is improving performance evaluation on budgeting and budget execution performance indicator. And recently in 2021, we conduct specific purpose audit on the synchronization of national development planning and budgeting. Some notable impacts are the government are now in the process of revising regulation related to synchronization of planning and budgeting. Why we think it's important? Because in Indonesia, the planning and budgeting process are done by two different ministries. So we have two different ministries that they have the responsibility to plan and budgeting. So because there are two different ministries, then there would be risks like unsynchronization between planning and budgeting. Some budget there are some activities that are planned might not be budgeted, and vice versa. So we think that synchronization is important between planning and budgeting, because it's already consumed a lot of the government resource when doing the planning and budgeting. And also other notable impact is the interconnection process between the planning app and the budgeting application is underway, so that no more redundancy might occur when updating any change during the year. I think I will stop here for my presentation. Thank you for your attention and for the chance.
Thank you very much, Ramadan. That's indeed a very, very comprehensive one, covering all the entry points from Indonesia perspective and the opportunities. And I see a lot of questions also coming in. So it's wonderful to see about 300 participants connected on this call. Even now the numbers are growing up. Please put in your questions into the chat function, and we are collecting, and we'll come back to the panelists with your questions. So with that, let us turn from Indonesia next to Zambia. May I invite Nwawa Mafande, Forensic Audit Unit Principal Auditor from the Office of Auditor General of Zambia, to come in with the intervention from Zambia experiences. Over to you. So if we have challenges connecting to Zambia, it can be now move to Sally Taubert, Policy Manager, International Budget Partnership. Let me just mention, so we in the PIFA Secretariat, we have been super delighted to work on the handbook that's based on which this conversation is going on in the webinar series. And actually, I congratulate everyone from International Budget Partnership for setting up the agenda. The handbook has been a basis to scale up this discussion, get this impact on the PFM impact from the Supreme Audit Institutions be on the forefront of discussions, and it's wonderful to see this exchange going on. Over to you, Sally.
Thank you so much, Srini, and it's exciting to be with you all today. We're very excited to talk a bit about this handbook, as Srini mentioned. So yes, a little bit about the International Budget Partnership is we are an international NGO that partners with budget analysts, community organizers, and advocates around the world to advance public budget systems that work for people. And this handbook is a really exciting step, and we're very grateful to UNDESA and all of the SAIs who actually jointly authored. This is not IBP, this is really a collaborative effort between all of the author SAIs, including many on this call today, in producing this guidance for how SAIs can conduct budget credibility audits. And we're also key in developing this webinar series, so we're incredibly grateful for this partnership. So the handbook is a tool that explores different approaches in auditing budget credibility. It's got a wealth of experiences and lessons that you see already being posted in the chat. And it is the result of 2 years of this collaboration between SAIs, civil society, international organizations, including our very deep gratitude to PIFA and other public finance experts. And most of my remarks now will draw from this guidance, but I'm going to speak very specifically to the role of the public, and that means communities and civil society organizations, or CSOs. That the role that we as external to the government, that we can play in helping to both identify but also address some of the PFM challenges that lead to budget credibility and can undermine service delivery. We see audits as such a critical function in a really good accountable PFM system to help understand where the problems lie and to start pushing for reform to address these challenges. PSOs are really starting to be very concerned about this question of budget credibility because it's a frame to really help us think in advance about how to look at public finance systems and how to figure out where there are potential problems in public finance systems. So just a bit of background, budget credibility really is this deviation between approved and executed budgets. When we see that repeated years over years, that's really a flag, right? A red flag that there's something wrong going on in that program or that sector. And so it helps CSOs kind of zone in and focus on where are the potential issues within the public finance system. And it's also a helpful monitoring tool, right? So if we know there's a problem, how do we know it's being fixed? So tracking budget credibility over time tells you, well, is this problem stuck, or is it being worked on? And we are really concerned because we actually more often see budget credibility issues in the types of spending that many CSOs look at because it's critical for supporting vulnerable and marginalized people, such as spending on health or spending on agricultural support programs. So I'll give you one example from Nigeria where we have research done by the CSO's budget and data fight. And they show that year after year, spending in the health sector often falls below the approved budget at both federal and state levels. And they did a bit of digging, and they realized that this problem comes from delays or failures in cash releases for health spending from the finance ministry, but also that when it's released, it wasn't being utilized by line ministries or spending units. And that as a result, a lot of this money that was supposed to be going to health was being returned to the Treasury and not spent year after year. And in some states, they saw when they looked at the overall budget that even as, say, funding for primary healthcare was being underspent, other government programs were being overspent. And they particularly looked at roads and an airway construction programs and saw that this was actually being overspent. So you see these shifts in funding from some critical sectors and say, well, is this being really looked at? Because these PFM issues are not just technical issues, right? These are actually critical governance issues, and we think they need more attention. And the reason we think they need more attention is because budget execution in particular is an area of the PFM system that doesn't necessarily get as much oversight or attention as other steps in the PFM process. First, on transparency. So actually, we have data from the Open Budget Survey that shows that year after year, most national governments release more information during the budget formulation and approval stages of the budget as compared to budget execution. So, and also when we look into those actual government reports, we often find that the budget deviations are not explained and that the data may be reported, but the government hasn't actually identified the specific reasons or causes for those deviations or disclosed their impacts on service delivery. The second issue is that on public participation, which we heard our Auditor General from Kenya just speak to. Many governments are not engaging with communities during budget execution or implementation. So the Open Budget Survey also finds that national governments have fewer opportunities for public engagement during budget execution as compared to budget formulation or approval. Finally, we see that legislatures and parliaments tend to pay less attention to budget execution issues, for example, holding fewer public hearings during budget implementation, as opposed to when they have a very much more prominent role in approving the budget. And all of this put together means that we think budget execution has a big accountability gap, where governments can change spending patterns and priorities without the same levels of public scrutiny that they get when they're presenting the draft budget. So many of the CSOs that we work with have started to work on trying to understand what is happening, why do these problems occur, and have found that actually when we start speaking to government, many of the government officials who are working inside the systems themselves either do not know, or actually they have different stories. They don't agree on why these problems keep occurring. So you need someone from outside, such as an auditor, to really come and give you that perspective of what's not working here within these public finance systems. The other thing that we found is that many of these issues start at multiple points. So you've heard our colleague from Indonesia talking about looking across the budget cycle, and that's true. Even though we're talking a lot about budget execution, the reason that these budget credibilities happen can actually start at different points within the budget system. So for example, when we talk about cash flow issues, many of those actually come from the budget formulation process, where say you don't have an accurate revenue projection, or you don't know how much money you're going to receive, which release then means that you have a cash flow gap, you don't have enough cash, or there's delays in issuing debt to give you the new cash that you need. And all of this that can then cause delays down the chain in terms of where the cash goes in your government system. Other challenges we see, for example, in procurement, where actually the procurement rules are being followed correctly, but perhaps they're too complex, or there's not enough people who are hired to implement them. And you get these long delays in actually getting goods and services purchased or projects being completed. So you have to, so we're hoping to really focus, right? We're hoping through this work, there's ways to really focus on where the problems are. And auditors can have a view on this that even CSOs from outside cannot see, right? Auditors you're gonna have greater access to data. You have much more authority to ask for questions to be answered. So these audit reports are so critical for this oversight function of what's going wrong within these public finance systems. And CSOs are really interested in working with auditors around this question. And we're seeing now many CSOs coming to auditors with the evidence or with the findings that we have about what's going on and saying, is there a way you can audit this? Is there a way we can add this to the audit plan? So we hope that auditors view these requests from CSOs as actually useful and helpful ways to identify where specifically there might be problems in the PFM system that undermine service delivery. I'll give you an example of one case where this has actually happened already. So in Ghana, we worked with some partners who were looking at a fertilizer subsidy program that was supposed to be supporting smallholder farmers. And they were supposed to be accessing much kind of lower cost fertilizer to support agricultural production. A group called the Peasant Farmer Association of Ghana, or PFAG, saw that actually the government was overspending on this program, but under-delivering. And this was happening years after years and didn't know why. And after speaking with the government and fertilizer suppliers, found that actually the subsidized fertilizer was not getting purchased or distributed as planned because of chronic government arrears, and that the government was not paying invoices to the fertilizer suppliers on time, in part for larger questions of arrears within the government, but in another part because those payment invoices were being delayed because of very real risks of leakages, and the finance ministry was worried about them. But this also impacted downstream issues. And so now our partners PFAG and IBP went to the audit service in Ghana and said, is this possible to audit this issue? And they said, yes, we see this issue. And actually they expressed interest in including it in their audit program. So we're now hoping that an audit of this issue will be underway and that there can be a way to resolve this issue. So to sum up, we see that citizen engagement around audits can really help support more effective audits on PFM systems. And so we really encourage auditors to open up and consider working with CSOs on the development of your audit program, but also in conducting these audits on budget credibility. So thank you, Srini, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Sally. In fact, actually, that's the core that is an additional layer which is coming is the the level of enthusiasm CSOs, civil society now wants to play. And it's really heartening from what you said, the kind of interest and the experiences. It's an added value to SAIs. It's an added value to the entire governance cycle for sure. Thank you so much. And let's now see if are we in a position to connect to Zambia, or should we go to question and answers? So I guess actually we still have issues connecting Zambia. So let's go to question and answer section. And colleagues, and in fact, this is in 2024. This is one of the most interactive and exciting chat function and Q&A function I have seen on webinars. So keep the activity up. Thanks for all the questions. I'll try to put some of the questions, and some of them are already answered on chat, but I'll put some of them for the speakers to speak about. Let's first go to the first question, which is a pointed one to to the Auditor General. The question is essentially like, how do you identify the institutions, PFM institutions, for budget credibility? So every institution is using budget. So budget credibility should happen only when all institutions are doing well, then the budget credibility is higher. But from an auditor's perspective, how do you select the institutions for assessing this? Is there a kind of a prioritization or weightage that you give? Over to you, Auditor General.
Thank you very much, Srinivas, and for that question. When we are carrying out assessment, especially using the Public Finance Management Reporting Framework, it is critical that we look at first the core PFM institutions. We have to look at Parliament that has the mandate to approve the budgets, to appropriate the funds, and also to approve the law for the revenue raising law. And then we look at the National Treasury that guides the public sector entities on budget preparation and gives even the templates and the guidelines on what do you do, how do you prepare your budgets, and what are the limits, because there are usually ceilings or limits to what every entity should prepare for. Then we look at the Revenue Raising Authority. In Kenya, that is the Kenya Revenue Authority. How independent are they? How strong are they? How well are they collecting their revenue? So those three are critical. And then we also have some constitutional commissions that have been created by our constitution in Kenya, like what we call the Commission on Revenue Allocation between the national and sub-national government. We also have a very, very critical input on revenue sharing. So those are key as core PFM institutions. For the MDAs, we look at critical MDAs have a role to play. All MDAs, of course, have a role to play, but there are those critical ones on SDGs and the National Development Plan. So we look at areas like the health sector, we look at the education sector, we look at the agriculture sector, and those particular MDAs or ministries form part of the assessment. But for the annual audits, we audit every state department and every ministry with regard to how they're utilizing their resources. So the choice of the MDAs is based on what have I been reporting over the years concerning the way those particular entities are utilizing their budgets and how their budgets are aligned to their work plans and the delivery of services and achievement of the work plans. So that is part of the criteria that we use. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor General. That's indeed a very clear articulation. Let me also supplement to your response from my perspective, that it eventually the selection of an institution is, as you rightly pointed out, linked also to which area is of a matter of concern. Say, looking at it from the SDG goals perspective, say, for example, health-related goals are a focus, then budget credibility in health sector is something pretty important. Let me also mention, from PIFA, you have two indicators, PI1, which is at aggregate fiscal discipline. That's across the entire government. Then PI2, it is on how within the ministries, how within the lines, the budget variations are taking place. So many cases we see aggregate level sometimes is better, but the real problem also comes on the distribution across, and that can affect goods and services and the quality of services to citizens. So, wonderful. Thank you, Auditor General. Please stay tuned. I'll come back to you in a moment, but let me turn to another question. It's a kind of into both the other panelists, essentially, if you can quickly comment on what happens if SAIs recommendations are not followed. What should either the SAI themselves do, or what can CSOs do? So how do we work around that? And also, if you can comment on what if the SAI's capacity to audit budget credibility is low, how can we strengthen the abilities of SAIs? First, maybe I'll turn to Ramadan and then Sally.
Okay, thank you, Srinivas. Thank you for the question. Try to address the question about if audit recommendations are not implemented, then what can the SAI do? What is the role of the civil society? So when audit recommendations are not implemented, then I think SAI can do several actions. One is SAI can do follow-up audits. So SAI conducts follow-up audits to assess the implementation status of the previous recommendations. And this involves revisiting the audited entities to evaluate whether they have taken corrective actions based on the signal audit findings and determine to investigate the reason why the auditee not follow the recommendation. So SAI first can conduct follow-up audits, and then SAI can engage with the stakeholders so they can report it to the parliament about the percentage of follow-up by the audited entities by the government. So maybe from 100 recommendation, how much have they followed and how many have they not followed? So they can report it to the parliament so they can have legitimacies, and maybe the parliament will support the SAI to further elaborate the recommendation to the audited entities. And also the SAI can also report it to the public by publishing the percentage of follow-up recommendation by the government, and also can conduct direct communication to the public. So I think if the situation is like that, recommendations are not implemented, then SAI can report it to the parliament, to the stakeholders, to the public. They can seek legitimacies from the public. So the governments will be forced, will be encouraged to follow it because their performance are publicly accessible by the public. And so and then what is the role of the civil society? I think the role of civil society is very important because they can raise awareness and advocacy about budget credibility. And also, I think many civil society organizations or CSOs play a pivotal role in advocacy efforts and to encourage the government to follow the recommendation made by the SAIs. And also, maybe in some instance that the society can raise legal action or even public pressure if something wrong made by the government. So I think that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramadan. Sally?
Thank you, Srini, and thank you, Mr. Pritchard. I think you've covered. You said much of what I was going to say, but I'll just reinforce a little bit. So absolutely, I think just in general, many civil society organizations are pushing for public hearings on audit reports because that discussion and debate with the legislature really is informative, and it helps really people understand how legislators are responding and how they're directing governments to change. The second piece is, and this is not a challenge for every country, but there might be some countries. In some countries, we have challenges getting access to audit reports. So publication of audit reports in a timely way, which we usually say within 6 months of the finalization or as best practice, but can, at least within a year, but fairly quickly publishing online your audit reports so civil society can access it. This is so critical because otherwise, how is civil society supposed to help with the follow-up on audit engagements? But it's a great question. Okay, so now we have an audit finding. How do we help get it passed? I think Mr. Putra very, very rightly said, many CSOs actually are starting to pay more attention to audit reports in terms of looking at the specific findings, looking at the recommendations, and helping the public media communities understand them and become more engaged in the conversation around what change needs to happen. So there really is a mobilization effort that civil society can do that's very important, because this really helps also motivate governments to change, because we've got more attention, more scrutiny on what's being done on these findings. But even more than that, on the actual outreach on the findings, in some countries it goes further than just mobilization. It really is actually collaboration on reaching out to the stakeholders that need to be involved in the change process, whether that's connecting with parliamentary committees, political parties, the implementing agencies, putting people together, having a joint conversation around how do we get this thing that's stuck unstuck and moving and starting to change. So CSOs really can have a very positive impact in working with auditors across these different streams.
Thank you, Sally. So let me pose the next question in terms of, say a PFM assessment through a budget credibility lens is done by the Supreme Audit Institution. How do governments, what is the expectation from governments, that's the line ministries, Ministry of Finance and the legislature, in response to the audit report? Let me also share a tidbit of information. So if we add up all the PIFA reports across, PIFA is used in 155 countries, and if you add up all the PIFA assessment reports, which scores each indicator on a scale to A to D, and kind of create a global score, which doesn't make sense, but assuming we just add it up, the score is roughly a C, an average score, which means it's basic level of performance, which actually means if there are audits done of PFM systems in many countries, there would be quite significant audit observations, one on how budget credibility is affected and the reasons for that. The reasons for budget credibility includes each aspect, procurement weaknesses, say, internal audit weaknesses, each aspect, there could be weaknesses. How do we expect governments and legislatures to respond to such an audit report? Maybe actually we can go around all the three speakers, and if they have comments, should we start with the Auditor General herself? Ms. Gadunga?
Thank you very much. I think depending on how the audit has been carried out and the objectives and the scoping of that audit, we would expect Parliament and other stakeholders to receive the results positively. You've talked about the PIFA assessments that give an average of, for example, a global C. But in that average means there are some pillars that are bringing down the score, and there are some pillars that are raising the score. So it would be very, very important to look at the pillars that are bringing down the score and work on those to strengthen them so that you get a real average. If you get maybe a C across all the pillars, and then you have an average of a C. But if you have a D in some of the areas, then very, very important that they are addressed. And depending on how this information is communicated, because communication is key, then I do not doubt that Parliament and other stakeholders would receive this positively and follow up on implementation of any improvements that need to be done to ensure that a better score is achieved in the next cycle of assessment. And this requires that a Supreme Audit Institutions works very, very closely with key stakeholders, the National Treasury and Planning or Ministry of Finance and Parliament, to ensure there's an understanding of what those scores actually mean in the PFM system of a country. They are not just scores that are put out there to embarrass the country, because some are quite embarrassing when you see them, or a score to celebrate. They are actually speaking to the PFM system and its strength, its responsiveness, and how it can support the national development goals of a country and implementation of the SDGs.
Thank you, Auditor General. Ramadan, any thoughts on
Thank
this?
you. Yes. Okay, thank you very much for the questions. I think to increase the awareness of the result of audits on budget credibility to the Parliament and the governments, I think the communication is important. So SAIs should communicate the impacts of the audits or what could be wrong if the recommendation are not followed by the government. So SAIs should have clear and accessible reporting for the parliament and the government, and the audit reports should be clear, concise, and easily understandable by a broad audience. So SAI can highlight important aspects, importance impacts that is important for improving the PPM system. And besides that, SAI can also conduct regular reporting to the parliament, and maybe they can have SAI can schedule with the parliaments about regular meeting every 6 months or semesterly to report their audits to the parliament, what have they done. I think more on that, then they can report how many state funds can be saved by their audits, and also what impacts, what good benefit can be done, can the government get by following the recommendations of the audit. So I think SAI should communicate their audit reports effectively, concisely, and make it as interesting as possible and as engageable as possible, so that the parliament will follow the recommendation because of the benefits of the impacts that may result from following the recommendations. Thank you. Maybe that's my point.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ramadan. Sally?
I fully agree with both of my preceding colleagues' remarks wholeheartedly, but I think I'll also add, I think from what we're learning from engaging within the CSO community and with broader communities around these public accountability systems on budgets, is that it's incredibly helpful to translate what otherwise can be very technical recommendations into what it means for people's services. And so I think when we see, for example, a lot in the handbook, you'll see references to, for example, performance audits, which are really looking at very specific issues that you see within particular sectors or programs. That's a really helpful frame for CSOs, because you get a lot more attention when you flag that money's not getting to where it's supposed to go, or spending is not being done in the way it's supposed to be meant. For programs that people know and see and understand, this is how it affects me. And I think if we really want more people to become involved in this accountability ecosystem that we're all trying to build around public finances, to make them really function for the people, that is a way that I think auditors really, as Mr. Putra was just saying, making these audit recommendations much simplified, but also explaining really the impacts that we see. If we change these public finance systems, what are we hoping to achieve at the end with that? And that's a big goal. It's always kind of the gold standard at the end, but that really does get a lot more people interested in these audit findings and willing to work together to try and get these changes done.
Wonderful, Sally. All three of you, I think actually there's a common thread I heard from all three of you. One, governments would love it, legislatures would love it, because they want to know and they want to fix the system, because it is with the government's interest to fix the system, and the reports would be received well. It requires simplicity, effective communications, and impact. Identify what it leads to, what are the implications for service delivery, what is it in them for the government, for the Ministry of Finance in the report, to the broader stakeholders, for them to understand and interpret it very better. But I completely agree with you, and I can also share my own experiences from the PIFA partnership itself. So PIFA reports, as you know, in the PIFA website, you have all the PIFA reports. So we don't even these days, for last many years, we have never even mentioned any government or any development partner who leads a PIFA assessment where on the need for making a report public. Default, governments want to make the assessments. The demand is coming from the ministries of finance, and they want to publish the reports as such. So, which means this energy and enthusiasm to fix the PFM systems is quite widespread all over, and we can tap on that in all aspects and through the SAI audits as such. Let me quickly go to another question. I'm clubbing two questions here. It's more into forensic fraud, wastage, and related aspects. So like it has two. One aspect is, can SAI conduct a forensic investigation of budget credibility? forensic, when we say that, that means there are some doubts about irregularities happening, not just deviations based on projections and all, but something beyond. And then related to that is also like, how do you mitigate in the budget execution the risks of fraud and corruption? Typically, SAIs always had this line, a demarcation line. They look at a little bit of fraud and corruption, but they're not primarily responsible to tackle fraud and corruption, for which there is another mechanism. So how do we work around the structure from a budget and PFM perspective in navigating through fraud and corruption? And does forensic audit play a role? So maybe we can start with the Auditor General.
Thank you for the question. For the Supreme Audit Institution of Kenya, the Constitution gives the mandate to carry out investigations or special audits. So that is in the mandate. And this mandate is either on the behalf of a requester. Anyone can request the Auditor General to carry out an in-depth audit of a particular area, which is basically an investigation or a forensic audit, or on the Auditor General's initiative. Sometimes when you're issuing certain financial audit reports, the annual reports, you realize it's a matter that may require some in-depth audit, subject matter specific. So my mandate allows me to go in and carry out another audit, on more in-depth audit, and issue a separate report. And to do that, I have actually a forensic audit department within the office. Now, to determine which areas to look at, it's very, very important to plan well. And to plan well using risk assessment tools, probably past reports or unusual activity within an entity or a ministry, department, or agency. Have your parameters well defined. And that way you are able to identify which are higher risk areas that may require more in-depth audit. What exceptions reports or what exceptions are you identifying during the routine annual audit reports? Then that now qualifies for a more in-depth forensic audit. So it is not an easy area. Sometimes it requires some biasness. You calculate, but you're still having that, what we call the sixth sense, that there could be an issue based on the budget. For example, if you find an unusual vote that has been introduced in a budget or has been dropped from a budget, or some unusual movement or transfers between government entities, it requires a bit of experience and capacity building for the staff that carry out those audits. But yes, a Supreme Audit Institution can carry out forensic audit, but it depends on the mandate.
Thank you, Auditor General. The mandate, and if there's a mandate, then there is professional judgment exercised by the auditors. What is to be identified and dug into, and also the capacity building, I'm sure, within the Auditor General to enhance so that the right team does the audit and gets to the right conclusions. Wonderful indeed. So from Indonesia, do you have any thoughts, Ramadan?
Okay, thank you, Srinivas. So, can SAIs conduct forensic audit investigation to ensure budget credibility? First of all, we'd like to say that our mandate in Indonesia, so we can also carry out the forensic audit. So, and we can do that, the forensic audit, based on our own planning, or as requested by the prosecutor or the police or the prosecutor. So basically, we have the mandate to do that, and we conduct actually forensic audits, not specifically designed to assess the budget credibility, but the result can be linked or has a connection with budget credibility, since fraud may be the reason, the cause of the underspending, overspending, or the underperformance of the budget. For example, there might be over budget, the budget that has not been planned appropriately because there is a fraud hidden between in the government or between the parliament and the government. So they may mark up the budget in order to have to gain benefit from that. So forensic audit can assess, can investigate that. So I think forensic audit investigation, although not specifically designed to assess budget credibility, but the result of the audit has a connection to assess, to improve the budget credibility, because fraud that occur within the government in the execution of budget, and also from the planning of budget, since from the planning, the budgeting phase until the execution, fraud, if there is fraud in there, then they could harm the effectiveness of the budget. I mean, they may be the reason of the underspending, overspending, or other risks of budget credibility. That's my point. Thank you.
Very well unpacked. Thank you very much, Ramadan. Sally, any thoughts from your side?
Not on this one. I'll let's move on perhaps to the next question.
Good. So maybe as we transition, I think we are coming close to the last 15 plus minutes of the webinar. Can we try once more for Zambia if we have Mr. Mupande connected? Mupande, are you able to unmute and speak?
Hello, are you, sir, we're having connectivity issues. Are you able to get me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead. Please go ahead for the next. Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead with your intervention for the next 3-4 minutes.
Okay, thanks a lot. I even missed out on the last. I couldn't get clearly the last question that you were discussing. Just come again on the last question.
Thank you. So maybe actually you can start off and share your Zambia experiences on use of public financial management audit, Supreme Audit Institutions work for improved budget credibility. Your reflections.
Okay, thanks a lot. Actually, for SAIs Zambia, the audit of the performance of the PFM has actually been taken as a game changer, actually, with regards to the way the SAI now looks at the overall system and all the participants in the public finance management system, starting from the, even looking at the audit of the entire budgeting cycle, starting from the macroeconomic policies, fiscal policies, strategic budgeting, budget approval, finance management and service delivery, looking at accounting, reporting and auditing, because previously we would audit these, like in not a coordinated manner. As a result, we would not have a clear picture as to how the PFM is actually performing at a national level. So with the use of the PFM, more especially the tool that we've been using, the Public Finance Management Reporting Framework tool from AfroSAI, it's really given us another perspective of how to carry out these audits, which has actually led to us giving value-adding recommendations, as we are now able to not only give recommendations that previously would just look at the symptoms, but now we are looking at the root causes of the symptoms in these institutions. And then the recommendations are of high quality now, because now they are able to be applied. And then the various assessments on the PFM in Zambia has also led to improvement in legislation, rules with regard to financial management. We've now, including budget preparation, because now we've now got a budget act. We've also got the Public Finance Management Act, which has been improved and gives sanctions to surcharge and sanctions to abuse of public funds. But overall, the PFM audit has given us a new perspective now, because we're able to link, how, for example, that revenue collecting authority is able to link with the Minister of Finance, the core PFM institutions, and Parliament, and then the other selected ministries, departments, and agencies with regards to budget credibility. In a nutshell, that is a brief overview from our experience as SAIs Zambia from here.
Wonderful, and super happy, glad you could connect and we could hear you very clear. Thank you for the experiences of SAIs Zambia. And personally, I would recollect my own experiences way back from 2014 onwards when I was interacting with SAIs Zambia, the enthusiasm and interest of the teams to look at PFM issues. It has always been pretty strong, and good to see this progressing so well. And colleagues actually as well, and all the participants, we are now coming towards the last section of this webinar. I would turn to each of the speakers to make 1 or 2 minute closing comments on what are the key recommendations to advance SAI work in the area of PFM and budget credibility audit. And can we start with Auditor General Gatungu? Any final closing comments and thoughts and recommendations?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rivanas. Time has really moved quickly. I think based on the current events that the world is experiencing, the SAIs cannot be left behind with regard to adding their voices to national development and sustainable service delivery to the people. Because national development, implementation of SDGs, service delivery cannot be achieved without a sound public finance management system. So the onus is on us to get in and do work. We don't wait to be invited. We move in because it's our mandate as oversight institutions to ensure that we add value. So we have to look at areas of prioritization and development agenda and alignment between national development plans and the SDGs and others priority areas, including, for example, in Africa, we have Agenda 2063 from the African Union. How is the alignment between those global, regional, and national plans? How are the PFM processes supporting this prioritization? Because we have a bird's eye view of what is happening with regard to PFM systems and how the PFM systems are aligned to the work plans. And we can be able to do analysis and point out areas that are potential challenges for achievement of results. We look at the strength of our PFM and the resilience of flexibility in weathering the shocks and efficiently reallocating resources to the reprioritized areas, because when circumstances change, then there's reprioritization, and especially to respond in times of emergencies and to support accountability. Very, very critical that we cannot do it alone. We have to work with key stakeholders, not just government actors or private sector actors, but the representatives also of citizens like the civil society organizations, including the citizens themselves, because any action, any decision, any work plan that is made by governments affects their lives and their livelihoods. I find it increasingly challenging for me, but also very interesting for my office and my staff, that we are working very, very closely with the National Anti-Corruption and the Ethics Institution. When they are doing investigations, they are calling upon me to also weigh in and work with them and come in as one of their expert witnesses. And recently, very, very surprising, I've had the judiciary, judges writing to me and magistrates requesting for some special work on a certain area where they are prosecuting or hearing a certain matter to do with public finance management. They're asking for my report before they make their final judgment. That's an area that we have not previously explored, but I've realized that it's an area that as Supreme Audit Institutions, we must step up and work with all key stakeholders, including government and non-government institutions.
Wow, that's an inspirational call, Auditor General. Thank you very much for your closing comments. So, Ramadan, would you like to comment?
Okay, thank you, Srinivas. So for this opportunity, I would like to highlight some recommendation for SAIs that would like to audit the performance of the PFM system. So the first recommendation, I think, it's to select the area of the PFM in greatest need of an audit. So choosing the right area for audit is a strategic decision that requires a true understanding of the PFM landscape. And SAIs should prioritize auditing areas with the highest impact on public funds and areas that are prone to risk and inefficiencies. And this decision is often guided by a risk-based approach where auditor assess the potential impact of different PFM areas on government objectives and also the public trust or public fund. For example, selecting an area with a history of budgetary irregularities or where public resources are most concentrated can yield significant insights. The goal is to direct audit resource where they can bring about the most substantial improvement in financial management. So the step to select the area of PFM in greater state of audits, first we need to identify the areas needing improvement. This step involves a true assessment to identify areas within the PFM system that require improvement. It involves analyzing financial records, assessing institutional arrangements, and evaluating adherence to fiscal policies. The next is assessing impact of the audit. Once the areas in need of improvement are identified, the next step is to evaluate how the audit process could positively impact these specific PFM areas. This include we should consider the potential outcomes of the audit, such as increased transparency, strengthening fiscal discipline, or improve budget credibility. And also, we would like to recommend, if in case where multiple areas require improvement are identified, then it may be possible SAI can consider to conduct a series of audits of the PFM system, so they can do it incrementally year by year. So this first year they can choose one topic and another year other topic, but it's related in that interconnection. So what we mean by series of audits, it implies a strategic based approach, allowing the SAI to address each identified area systematically. And this approach will ensure a more in-depth and examination of each aspect on need of improvement. For example, if you want to audit the effectiveness of the debt management of a country, and to audit that, we should have sufficient knowledge about the budget formulation, budget executions, budget planning, and other aspects. So we could design the audit. So the first year we conduct the budget planning aspect of the PFM system, and the preparation of budget or budget formulation the first year, and the second year we audit the budget execution, and the third year we can conduct the debt management audit. So it's a series of audit focused on to achieve something that we planned earlier. So that's our first recommendation, and the second is of course to ensure the effectiveness of the follow-up audit recommendations. Since the conclusion of audit doesn't mean the end of SAI's role, SAI still need to ensure that their recommendations are followed by the government. So because the recommendation is what will improve the aspect that has been audited by the SAI. SAI must monitor and follow up on the implementation of the recommendation, and they should work closely with the relevant stakeholders, the parliament, the government, to address whether the government follow their recommendation or not. Effective follow up to ensure that audit findings translate into improvements in the PFM system. So if the government follow the recommendation, then it will translate into improvements in the PFM system. And it will require establishing clear communication channels, setting realistic timelines for implementation. So SAI could urge the government to have action plan and on how they will follow the recommendation, or what will they do to follow the recommendation, and the timeline that will timeline for the follow up the recommendations. And also we in Indonesia we have regulation that state the governments have to follow our recommendation. So one power, I mean that's also one aspect of SAI that can be improved is if they have regulations that the government should follow the recommendation made by SAI, then it will effectively address the follow-up of audit recommendation. I think that's my 2 points for this session. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Ramadan. Very clear, sequential progressive audits and the recommendations to be acted upon. Wonderful. And Mr. Mapande, are you still connected with your audio working? If you want to come in for a minute of closing comment.
Okay, thank you once again. My closing comments with regards to the recommendations on the PFM, audit of the performance of the PFM, is that it should enable the SAI add value to the benefit of citizens in line with the principle 12. With regards to helping recommendations, I mean, we need to ensure that the least effectiveness on the follow-up of audit recommendations that we are giving our clients, because we are able to understand the systems through the audit of the PFM. And these systems should lead, for example, to reduced audit observations and then channeling of, including abuse of or misuse of public funds, so that citizens get the value and the benefits of what the funds were intended for. Then would also recommend the continued cooperation with other sides on capacity development so that we continue improving and also recommend the complete understanding of the PFM system so that we're able to identify which are specific areas of the system and that need audit intervention so as to efficiently use the SAI resources on this audit. I think those are my closing thoughts on this.
Wonderful, Mupande, absolutely. And actually getting it into action and planning it out for and peer learning. And this series of webinars probably is one of the such initiatives for great peer learning. I hope everyone is enjoying this session. And finally, like Sally, any comments from your side, your closing comments?
Very quickly, I know we're just at the end of our time, so I just want to flag, I think, as you said, Srini, how inspiring it is to see so many SAIs take on the mandate, the mantle of ensuring that PFM systems are strong and working for the people. And it's really great to see so many examples of across the accountability system, how central auditors are to making this work. From the inspiring example we got from the Auditor General, Ms. Gathungo, so wonderful to hear about the auditing of public participation. From Indonesia, the auditing of transparency. And the openness that we see from so many SAIs and really listening to citizens and starting to hear from citizens where they see the problems are. And so we'd encourage every SAI who's on this webinar to really consider opening up to input from CSOs in the community on what should be audited. It's your call, you're independent, but many CSOs have really great evidence to contribute. And then think about participatory audits when you're doing the audits, hearing from citizens, hearing what they're seeing on this when they receive services, what's not working. And finally, collaborating with CSOs to get those audit findings acted on. I think it's wonderful to see this kind of all coming together, all groups willing to work together. We hope to see more of this in the future. Please feel free to reach out to us. Myself, Claire Schouten, you've got a lot of emails for, a lot of movement, Arancha, but also you and Dessa Montero from behind the scenes at UNDESA. So any of us reach out, so many examples to share, and we hope to continue this collaboration in the future.
Wonderful, Sally. You did fantastic closure comments for the entire webinar as well. I wouldn't try to summarize anything. As a closing from my side, on behalf of UNDESA and the International Budget Partnership, thank you very much to all the speakers who participated and all the participants. This has been such an exciting session. Please reach out to anyone on the call, and we all look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, and over. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much.
everyone.
Bye.